The story of Jephthah, a tale of vow, sacrifice, and redemption. The backdrop of Israel's turmoil. The story of Jephthah begins in a time of great turmoil and moral decay in Israel. The Israelites had fallen into sin, worshipping foreign gods, and abandoning the covenant they had with the Lord. As a result, God allowed them to be oppressed by the Ammonites, who were a constant threat on their eastern border. The Israelites cried out to God for deliverance, but the people had grown so accustomed to their disobedience that they had little faith left in their ability to repent and turn back to the Lord. The book of Judges tells us that God raised up a series of leaders to deliver his people from oppression, but this time, the Israelites were in a particular bind. The Ammonites were ruthless, and their king, the fierce Ammonite general, was determined to overrun Israel's territory. The Israelites needed a strong, capable leader to rally them, someone who could stand against the might of the Ammonite forces. Jephthah's unlikely rise. Jephthah was not a man anyone expected to lead. He was born in Gilead to a prostitute, and his father, Gilead, had a legitimate wife who bore him sons. When Jephthah grew up, the legitimate sons of Gilead rejected him, casting him out of the family and the inheritance because of his mother's shameful status. He fled to the land of Tob, a region east of Israel, where he gathered a band of outcasts, men who were also rejected by society for various reasons. Despite his humble and complicated beginnings, Jephthah was known for his remarkable strength and leadership. He became a mighty warrior, and over time, his reputation spread across the region. So, when the Israelites found themselves desperate for a leader to face the Ammonites, it was Jephthah they turned to. The leaders of Gilead went to Jephthah in Tob, seeking his help. They offered him a leadership role in exchange for his help in leading Israel's army against the Ammonites. At first, Jephthah hesitated. He reminded them of how they had rejected him years earlier. But the elders of Gilead pleaded with him, promising that if he delivered Israel from the Ammonites, he would be made their leader. Jephthah, seeing the gravity of the situation and sensing the opportunity for redemption, agreed to return and lead them. The negotiations with the Ammonites. Before marching into battle, Jephthah sought a peaceful resolution. He sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites to try to negotiate. Jephthah, wise in his approach, reminded the king that Israel had never taken the land of the Ammonites. He recounted the history of Israel's wanderings through the wilderness and their peaceful passage through the land, showing that they had not wronged the Ammonites. He also argued that the land in question had been taken by Israel in a war with the Amorites, not the Ammonites, and that it had been given to them by God. However, the king of the Ammonites was unmoved by Jephthah's reasoning. He refused to listen and demanded that Israel return the land that he claimed had been wrongfully taken. Jephthah realized that negotiation was no longer possible, and that the battle would be fought. Jephthah's vow to the Lord. As Jephthah prepared for war, he sought divine guidance and protection. He made a vow to the Lord, saying, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Judges chapter 11 verse 30-31. Jephthah's vow was a desperate promise. He believed that God would answer his prayers for victory, and in his zeal to secure divine favor, he made a vow that would ultimately haunt him. The vow he made was likely influenced by ancient customs of offering a sacrifice to God in times of extreme need, though the specific nature of his vow was unprecedented and tragic. The battle and victory. The battle between the Israelites and the Ammonites was fierce, but the Lord gave Jephthah the victory. The Ammonite army was defeated, and Jephthah returned home in triumph, victorious but unaware of the price he would soon pay for his vow. The tragic fulfillment of the vow. When Jephthah arrived home in Mizpah, his daughter, his only child, came out to greet him. She was dancing and playing the tambourine, celebrating her father's return from battle. She was filled with joy at the victory, but Jephthah was overcome with sorrow when he realized that his vow would be fulfilled. In the culture of the time, offerings to God were solemn, and Jephthah's vow bound him to perform a sacrifice. In an agonizing moment, Jephthah tore his clothes and cried out, "Alas, my daughter! You have brought me low, and you are the cause of my grief. I made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." His daughter, though heartbroken, responded with surprising grace. "Father, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, the Ammonites. But let this one request be granted, give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." Jephthah allowed her to mourn, and after 2 months, she returned to her father, and he fulfilled his vow. The specifics of what happened next are debated by scholars, but the implication is clear: Jephthah, in fulfilling his vow, offered his daughter in some way as a dedication to God. The tragic nature of this event reflects the deep sorrow that Jephthah felt. He had placed his faith in God but was now left with the consequences of his rash vow. Jephthah's legacy. Jephthah's story is a tragic one, and it serves as a cautionary tale. While he demonstrated great courage and faith in leading Israel to victory, his rash vow and the fulfillment of it left him with a deep and lasting wound. His daughter's sacrifice was remembered by Israel's women, who commemorated her story every year, mourning the tragic outcome of a father's vow. In the broader context, Jephthah's story illustrates several key themes. God's deliverance. God answered Jephthah's prayers for victory, showing that he was willing to work through Jephthah despite his humble beginnings and flawed nature. The dangers of rash vows. Jephthah's vow is a tragic reminder of the consequences that can arise from making hasty promises to God. It speaks to the need for careful consideration when making vows and decisions in moments of emotional intensity. Sacrifice and consequences. Jephthah's story highlights the tension between faithfulness to God and the severe personal costs of following through on one's commitments. Reflection. As we reflect on the story of Jephthah, we are reminded of the complexities of leadership, faith, and human nature. Jephthah was a man of great potential, but his story also reminds us of the importance of wisdom in our decisions and the weight of promises made in moments of crisis. While God did deliver Israel through Jephthah, the price of that deliverance was tragic and profound. Jephthah's story is not just about a man who made a great victory possible for his people, it is also about the painful cost of rash decisions, and about the painful lessons that come when we fail to fully consider the consequences of our actions. In the end, Jephthah's story is a mixture of triumph and tragedy. He rose from rejection to lead Israel, but his vow to God resulted in a heartbreaking sacrifice. His story teaches us that, while God can use anyone for his purposes, we must be careful in our promises and mindful of the weight of our words.